Father Clint, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you for having us here at your parish.
It's a great place.
It's my first time here. It's like a little diamond hidden in the side of Texas City.
And I'm glad I discovered it.
Saint Mary of the Miraculous Medal.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. And then there's a school as well.
Yeah, interesting. It's called Our Lady of Fatima. And people get confused because they're on the same campus. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't the case before 2010. The original parish location was in a different part of town.
Okay.
And the school was founded here like 1947.
Ooh.
And, or maybe it was 49. In any case, they gave it the name Our Lady of Fatima, but it was not a confusion because of the separate locations. Uh-huh. Now it is.
Now it is. Do people get confused with St. Mary here and St. Mary the Seminary?
All the time. Well, actually, it's St. Mary in League City. So they have St. Mary of the Expectation, and we have St. Mary of the Miraculous Medal. Texas City, League City, they're confused all the time. Show up for weddings at the wrong place.
Oh, no. Yeah. Wow. Do like the bride and groom go to the wrong place sometimes?
No, so far we haven't had that problem.
I mean, sometimes you punch something into the GPS and you don't think about it. And
right. Yeah.
That's fantastic. How long have you been here?
10 years.
10 years
I'm marking my 10th anniversary this month.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Did you grow up here in Houston?
Actually, I grew up in Crosby. So it's a town that some people have heard of but don't know where it is.
Exactly. I was about to ask you, where is it?
East Harris County, close to Huffman, close to Baytown.
Okay.
So that area.
Okay. And your family's still there?
Yeah. Yeah. Mom lives in the house that we grew up in. Mm-hmm. It was the first house that they bought when they got married. And my dad grew up on the same road.
Wow.
Okay. His brother, my uncle, lived on that road. My brother lives on that road today. My sister lives on that road.
Wow.
And my niece lives just a block off. So we're pretty well planted there in Crosby on that road.
That's awesome. Yeah. Did you grow up Catholic?
I did. Yeah.
So did you go to a Catholic school or go through the public school system?
Went through Sacred Heart Catholic School in Crosby.
Okay.
So 1st through 8th grade. Yeah.
As a child, did you think that you'd become a priest?
It wasn't on my radar. When we look back, there are some things that people will say, like my 1st grade teacher, Sister Clementine, said, I think Clint's going to be a priest.
Really?
And she told my mom, but my mom never told me until I started talking about entering the seminary. And then I remember attending daily mass, at the school and trying to recite the words of the second Eucharistic prayer along with the priest, because maybe to relieve boredom. And and I think, okay, well, if I can ever say this whole thing without, having to pause, maybe it means God's calling me to be a priest. But that was not really a desire. It was just something that I remember.
What did you want to be when you were a kid?
It depends on what age I was. In the 5th grade, I wanted to be a truck driver.
Okay.
My best friend, his dad was a truck driver, and we got to go in a Lone Star beer truck to San Antonio. So it was that was a highlight of my childhood. So that was early on. Then my fascination with football led me to wanting to be a wide receiver. Okay.
Did you play in high school?
Played 4 years of high school football. And unfortunately, my career was cut short by tragic lack of talent.
No, but you are pretty athletic, though.
The funny thing about it is I am, I guess, have to admit, but I'm mediocre at everything. I've tried all kinds of stuff, and I can get to be mediocre.
So jack of all trades, pretty much.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So going through high school, did you date around a lot, or were you pretty much a...
I probably shouldn't admit, yes, I did date a lot. I definitely enjoyed dating, yeah.
Was there a girl that you might have settled down with?
During high school, I would say no. I think one of the gifts that I have is seeing the goodness and the beauty in other people, and that in high school manifested as really kind of sequential dating,
Okay.
So, unfortunately, I kind of some regrets about that because I don't know that it always respected really the real feelings maybe of some of the girls that I went out with. But it was probably in college that I met a girl. Headed off to Austin College, as a freshman. That summer, my best friend had a girlfriend in East Texas, and her best friend would be going to Austin College. So he said, you should look up Amy when you get there.
Okay.
So I'd seen a picture, and first day on campus, literally first day, I'm walking around the campus, and I see a blonde, And I walk up to her and say, "Are you Amy?" And she said, "Yeah." "Are you Clint?" I said, "Yeah, I am." And we saw each other at a party that night, and we started dating. And that went on for the whole first semester and into the second. And then it kind of hit the rocks. And that actually was a big part of my vocation story. Okay, I was pre-med, and I thought I'd be an orthopedic surgeon. Okay, and I'd done some great stuff in high school where I got to be in an operating room with a total knee replacement.
Oh, wow.
And yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Real good program for people. So back to Austin College. Amy and I, looking good. I was thinking, man, this girl's great. Thinking about maybe someday, whatever. It hit the rocks. Okay. But at the same time, the whole time I was up there away from home, I had made the decision I was going to go to church. I didn't have a car, so I had to either borrow a car or I had to hitch a ride with somebody who was going to the local Catholic church. And I started paying attention. I started really listening. I said, I made the effort to get here. I might as well pay attention. Yeah. And I joined a Bible study on campus. I think those things, I was reaching out for something that would give me some stability. Retroactively or looking back, I had gone to the Explore program, but maybe I'll circle back to that later. But they had kind of introduced me to prayer, in a way that you really felt that there was a presence on the other end of that. And so as I was praying more, and praying regularly, Bible study, going to church, beginning to understand that, and the God was becoming real for me. And as we went into the spring semester, and she and I broke up, and I started taking organic chemistry, which was a sign from God that I wasn't called to be a doctor.
It was tough.
It was tough. And I began to realize that there are people who are really gifted in this, and that wasn't my gift.
So it was easy for them to pick up and not as easy for you.
Exactly. Started in a fraternity as well that semester, which added more chaos and turmoil and a lot of fun. But it was that made me really turn to God in a time of need and to really discover, God as a refuge and a strength. And I went home for spring break and I went to confession. And Father Stephen Mandry, our parish priest, gave me as my penance Psalm 116. And in that psalm, the psalmist says, "How shall I make a return to the Lord for all his goodness to me?"
Wow. That's fantastic.
I mean, you can see, it's been something that's been the touchstone that I keep coming back to.
Yeah.
How shall I make a return to the Lord for all his goodness to me? And I don't know that I felt it with that intensity in that first time that I prayed that as a penance, but it became that for me.
Yeah, it sunk in after a while. Wow.
And I said, this is what I want to guide my life. How do I make a return to the Lord for all his goodness to me? So the possibility of how does God want me to live my life? What does God want for my life? So the question changed from what do I want to do in life or what do I want to be to what does God want for my life? And am I willing to just be open to whatever that might be? And what if it was a total gift? What if it was becoming a priest? Which I will be honest with you, I did not find attractive at first.
Really?
I didn't see in the priesthood something that would give me happiness or joy. A lot of people say, well, why did you want to become a priest? I said, I didn't.
You looked at all the work that the priest does?
Well, I don't even know if I thought of it that, because I probably wasn't aware of it. I wasn't, my perspective, I had seen the priest on Sundays. I didn't know what it was like. But the gift of self that priests had made, I was aware of that. I said, they found something. Those guys found something that was worth making a big sacrifice for. And I was fascinated and I wanted to know what that was. I mean, I kind of had a hint, but I really felt like there's got to be something in the priesthood, or at least in this gift of themselves to God, that is worth making those sacrifices. And as the months unfolded, and I began to think about my future, that summer came around and I had to make a decision. I said, Father Mandry had suggested that I think about, with this question, maybe to explore that question in the seminary.
Did you at any point say, no, and just completely actively turn away from that?
No.
You were just hesitant.
Yeah, I was hesitant.
Okay.
I'm a practical decision maker, and I thought if I go back to Austin College, I'm going to be paying a lot of money, or my parents are going to be paying a lot of money. It's an expensive school. I'll be going there not really sure what to major in anymore at that point.
Because medicine was pretty much...
Yeah. I'd be going back for the fraternity and to see if Amy would ever take me back.
So speaking of the fraternity, did any of your fraternity brothers say, hey, forget about this priesthood stuff? Did you ever share any of that with them?
No. It was just too much of an unknown idea at that point. I don't know that I was really actively thinking about the priesthood in such a way that would have been conversation with them. Now, my best friend from high school, Robert, had joined me that semester. He had started his first year at UTEP. And so he came to Austin College, and his father had been a Methodist minister.
Okay.
And he and I had multiple conversations growing up about religion and stuff. Mm-hmm. And we were both going to the same Bible study.
Okay.
And he had began to manifest this idea that maybe he would change from medicine to theology. And that, I think, gave me a little inner permission to kind of begin to consider that. So he and I had conversations, I think, about the idea of serving God. Yeah.
Very interesting how it was a Methodist that kind of...
Yeah. The interesting thing about that story is that he ended up changing from theology to history, and then becoming having his doctorate in history, going off to teach in Abilene, Texas, and various places as a professor, and then converting to Episcopalian. And I went to visit him one day. I was passing through Abilene, and we had dinner, and across from the table like this, he says, well, Clint, I've got some news for you. And I looked at him, I said, you're becoming a priest. And he was like, he looked at his wife and he says, did you tell him? And I said, Robert, you and I have always been this way. We could finish each other's thoughts.
That's fantastic.
And so he's a priest today for the Episcopalian Church in the Diocese of Fort Worth.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, cool stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was there a moment that you said, I'm going to pull the trigger on this. I'm going to contact somebody about entering seminary?
It was probably in June. So a lot of the summer, or at least the first part of the summer, had already dissipated with my hemming and hawing.
Okay.
I went to visit an ex-girlfriend and tell her I was thinking about the seminary, and really with the hope that she would tell me, oh, you shouldn't do that, Instead, she said, oh, that would be great. You'd make a great priest. Oh, I'm so happy for you. So interesting that she's very a big promoter of vocations even today, and you probably know her. But in any case, that was like another thing. Okay, well, that's not going to be an option. So I called probably in late June the vocation office.
Okay,
and they called me in. I'm sure they must have talked to the pastor, and they said, okay, let's bring him in for an interview. And within 6 to 8 weeks, I was entering the seminary. Wow. They would never do that today.
Who was the vocation director back then?
Father Mario Arroyo is guilty of that. Is guilty of that decision. And I tell Monsignor Borski, too, I said, if he had done his job, I wouldn't be a priest today.
Why do you say that?
Because I think they should have kicked me out on multiple occasions. But,
Why? Why do you say that?
I think because I entered the seminary with such an immature discernment that the first 3 years, while I was still going through college, meant I had to go through a lot of ups and downs. A lot of, this doesn't make any sense. Why am I here? To renewing the passion, renewing the desire. So it just was up and down,
So you think it should have taken you longer to discern to get in?
Well, I mean, God has his plans.
Yeah.
I think today we would be more cautious and with right reason. But they took a chance on me, and I'm certainly glad they did. Yeah.
So can we go back? This ex-girlfriend of yours, is she well known in Houston?
I think in certain circles, but probably just keep that to ourselves.
Okay. Yeah, maybe she doesn't want her name out there or something like that. That's fine. Yeah. So when you entered seminary, so you said that it was pretty rough in the beginning. Were there moments when you thought, this isn't for me, at the end of the semester, I'm out?
Yeah, I don't even know if I was going to wait till the end of the semester.
Oh, really?
There were times whenever I sat on the steps of the seminary looking out at the Memorial Drive, watching cars go by and going, I don't belong here. But here's the gift. The grace that I had was that I had understood by our first retreat in January of that year that I had come here because I thought it was the will of God. Mm-hmm. And that the only way with integrity to leave was because I felt it was the will of God to leave. Mm-hmm. Not because I didn't like the seminary formation program or the universities, whatever those obstacles were. Uh-huh. And so that grace to say, I don't think it's God's will at this point that I do something else. So I persevered, finished the first year, decided to stay another year, and then I did that year. Uh-huh. Okay. And it started making more sense. I started meeting other priests that I thought were three-dimensional, that were real people. Okay. They weren't saints. And for that matter, all the seminarians weren't saints either.
I was going to ask that.
Okay, you got to adjust to the fact that there's a lot of broken humanity even in the seminary, right?
People still being formed. Yeah.
Exactly.
So during that time, were there guys like friends of yours, classmates that discerned out? And was that tough for you, seeing them go out?
Yeah. In fact, all of them.
Really?
Yeah. We will joke around today with the guys who didn't persevere through and say, Clint was the last one we thought would make it. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So you were not the odds-on bet, but you were the last man standing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But that doesn't speak to their goodness or mine. It's just that, it's the history of the Bible, right? The whole salvation history is God picking the one that you don't expect.
Yes. I mean, like right behind you, you've got St. Juan Diego there. And he's not somebody you would have expected. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So when you entered the seminary, did you see some guys like, oh, this guy's definitely going to be a priest, and they didn't
for sure
end up?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. And then during your course, what point did you say, oh, I'm all in on this. This is really where I'm supposed to be?
So senior year, going to the University of St. Thomas, still unsure about the future and whether I would come in to the theology portion of that, what they used to call the theology level studies, graduate level studies. I began to attend a weekly Word of Life meeting of seminarians. So in fact, I usually keep it in my pocket, but there's a sentence of scripture that you try to put into practice for the month. And then when you get together, you share experiences of trying to put it into practice. Okay. Whether those are successes or failures, but it's a way to be evangelized by the word and then to have the fruits of that multiplied through the sharing of those experiences. Mm-hmm. And I loved it, because everything else was theoretical. All the classes were theoretical. Yeah. Whatever. This was real life. Yeah. This was, how are we trying to put this into practice? And it retouched that point of me, which is, this is about a spiritual journey, a discipleship because of a relationship, and not a job, a career path, right? Preparing to do stuff that you want to do. And that, I don't know, I realized that at the time. But by the end of the semester, I had already planned I was going to go to Europe. I was going to take a backpack and travel around to the capitals of Western Europe. Okay. Because Eastern Europe was still behind the Iron Curtain. That's how old I am. Okay. So I heard about this group that put out the Word of Life. They were called the Focolare movement. Yes. And the priest who had introduced us to that said, well, there are places in Italy where the seminarians have formation in this spirituality. So I said, oh, what's the address? Okay. So I get to Europe, and within 2 or 3 days, I'm in a little town on the banks of the Arno River south of Florence. Okay. So Tuscany, right? The fairy tale land of great food, beautiful landscapes, and this little place where at that time for the summer, there were probably 40 priests and seminarians. During the course of the year, there would maybe be as many as 100 spending time there trying to learn how to love your neighbor and then how to start over when you fail. So I showed up. They welcomed me with great open arms, etc. I didn't think I was going to stay. Initially, I thought I'd be there for a day. Okay, maybe 2. And the next morning I woke up and they said, would you be happy working in the kitchen with Thomas? He was a German priest. said, yeah, sure. So he said, and then we had our meditation together where that day we were going to try to live a particular word while we're washing dishes, while we're harvesting vegetables out of the garden, while we're cooking lunch for the rest of the house, etc. And then just building relationship. And I got hooked, and I stayed for 5.5 weeks. Then 5.5 weeks, I never went to Rome. I never went to any other capital. They invited me to go to a seminarian retreat for 2 weeks in Switzerland. So I, again, changed my plans and went to Switzerland to go deeper into this. And I just knew by the end of that experience that I had discovered again kind of the inspiring spark, you know.
Because the whole time you're in seminary, it's like study, right? It's all abstract.
And the spirituality has to do with not just an individual journey, but a collective journey. Because that spirituality of the Focolare focuses on unity.
Yes.
On building mutual love, you know, in very concrete ways, like in family life, you know. And that's very real, very incarnational. Like the word has to become flesh in the reality of daily life. So,
at any point, did you think about joining the Focolare?
Well, the Focolare doesn't really have, it's not like an order of priests that you can say transfer from your diocese to become a Focolare priest. What they do have are diocesan priests who try to live the spirituality of the Focolare. So I am involved in that. So, yeah.
Or was it in the back of your mind, like, hey, if ever I discern out going to the Focolare?
Absolutely. In fact, that was one of the key moments was when the issue of celibacy kind of came to the fore, you know, and began to realize that I have to make a real decision for this, you know, and a positive choice that this is what God is inviting me to, and not approach it as if it was just something that kind of came with the house, you know. And what came out of that discernment was if I didn't become a priest, I would become a Focolarino. Yeah, a lay man living in the world with others, you know, and just doing whatever. Yeah.
So after this experience, returning to the seminary, what was that like?
It was exciting because at that point I had said to God, I said, okay, God, if this isn't what you want for me, then you're going to have to, at that point, take control and you know, change the plan. And going back now with this inspiring kind of live this stuff, you know, like live the word of life in the seminary. And other seminarians started trying to do the same thing. And so then there was a little community of seminarians who really wanted to focus on putting it into practice. So.
Now let's backtrack a little.
Okay.
When you told your parents that you were entering seminary, how did they take it?
Oh, yeah. They had 2 different reactions. So my mom, she cried, not for joy, you know, and I'm sure she's going to watch this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think she looked at herself and said, there's no way I can be the mother of a priest.
Oh,
I mean, her own self-assessment was, I'm not that person, you know, because what she thought people would expect a mother of a priest to be like, you know.
That's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure, right? And I think she had her dream for me, you know, here, her son's going to be a doctor, you know, whatever. And then all of a sudden, I mean, it was a shock to them it was a shock to the whole town of Crosby because I had been the homecoming king, most likely to succeed, friendliest. It's like, you know.
Yeah, you're very sociable. Had a lot of girlfriends, had a lot of friends. Yeah.
And then the word's like, hey, Clint's going to become a priest. And then people would come up to me when I was home. Hey, man, I heard you're going to be a priest. And I'd say, no, I'm in the seminary, but I mean, the whole idea that I'm going to be a priest was way too much of a step forward for me. So I'd say, no, I'm just in the seminary. But for them, it was like, no, dude, you don't enter the seminary to not become a priest. So, yeah.
How about your dad?
Dad, he took me out on the back porch, I remember, and his words were very simple. He just said, son, people are going to respect you because you're a priest. But that doesn't mean you don't still need to earn that respect.
Oh.
And I don't know if he realized how wise that was, or if it was just something that came to him that he felt like he had to say. But it was like, yeah, people will respect you because you're a priest, but you still have to live into that. Yeah.
That is great advice.
Yeah.
What about your siblings?
Okay. So my sister, I don't know that she had any reaction at all. I mean, it's like she had already left home. She was already married. She already had at least one, if not two of her daughters.
Okay.
And I don't specifically remember a reaction on her part or it ever really coming up in conversation in a meaningful way. And I think my brother was more like incredulous, like just didn't have words for that. Just, it was not in his universe. And he couldn't put together, this. He hadn't had the experience I had.
Do you have any friends that said anything?
Yeah, some of those reactions I mentioned earlier were just sort of like, hey, hey, man, happy for you. That's interesting. Tell me about that, And
did anyone ever say, no, this isn't right for you?
No, I think that, I was a good guy. I mean, I think most of my friends knew that I was a good person, that they didn't necessarily see me becoming a priest, but I mean, I had a good reputation in high school of being respectful, of being friendly, So I think it wasn't like I had been a drug dealer, or been in a gang or something. But the idea for anybody, nobody expects. I shouldn't say that, but at least in my case, I don't think anybody saw it coming, just like I didn't.
Did anyone say to you, "Hey, you're not going to be able to have kids"?
Oh yeah,
become
for
a Catholic
sure.
priest.
Yeah.
Did they try to talk you out of it and say, hey, you're not going to have kids? Don't you want to have kids? Maybe you should think twice about this.
No, they didn't. I think they maybe could have or maybe thought about asking me, but I don't remember it really coming up in any kind of a challenging way, more than just sort of like, really?
Anybody say, oh, he's going to discern now. He's not going to make it all the way through.
I don't. If they did, they didn't tell me.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean they didn't. I'm sure my mom, I think, so I remember a conversation where I was excited about something I had studied in philosophy class. And I'm home for the weekend and I'm trying to tell my mom about this new philosophical concept or insight that I had. And she was not interested. It's like she couldn't get excited about this whole kind of thing. And I think there was a part of me that understood in that moment that she probably was hoping this would just blow over at some point, Yeah, so wasn't sure. Yeah, but I think what happened with my parents, though, is they got to know other seminarians as they visited the seminary. So they got to know the priests that were in charge of my formation. They were kind of brought into understanding, the reality of the presbyterate, the notion of a priestly fraternity. And I think they embraced it eventually after a couple of years, maybe. Yeah.
Would it help if, parents of seminarians had some kind of support group or something like that, do you think?
Well, even when I was vocation director, I thought we should find some way to involve parents in maybe doing something like this, where they could hear the story from the perspective of the parents. It'd be maybe that's something you guys can do next.
We had the parents of Father Ryan Staways on.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah,
okay.
So it was really great to hear their perspective
as
well.
Yeah.
Now, during the seminary, we've had some priests and seminarians talk about what they call chalice chippers or cassock chasers, or, because girl sees a guy who could make a good husband, good father.
Yeah.
Did you have any experience with girls trying to turn you away from seminary? Or just tempted you? Yeah.
I don't know that they were intentionally tempting me, but beautiful women do that just by being beautiful, or just their person, the vibrant personality that you're attracted to. So especially during the 3 years that I was at the University of St. Thomas on that campus, I was, interested in looking at getting to know various girls, usually a very, acceptable level, right? But I don't know that they were pursuing me. If they did, I didn't pick it up. If anything, I would have thought that I hope they don't realize I might be pursuing them, or that I'm trying to get to know them and stuff. So, I don't think that I sensed it from their part.
But there was a thought that, this girl could make a good wife in the future. But nothing really turned you in saying, I could leave seminary. Well,
to be real honest, there was someone who came into my life at a certain point and a friendship developed, but it was kind of like off the radar for me from a romantic standpoint. It was just more like she's a woman and we hit it off really well. we had lots of great conversations. We did some things together, go to movies, go out to dinner. And I didn't realize or think of it as a romantic kind of thing for a long time. But at some point, she broke that conversation open because she was feeling something towards me that I don't know that I was aware. I know I wasn't aware of it. As she did, maybe I had to kind of question myself as well. You know, what's the nature of this relationship for me? You know, and is this something that should continue and can continue? Once I knew her feelings and then I, stepped back and really discerned, I had to come to that tough decision to say, we just cannot even be friends.
Yeah, that's tough because it's a weird line that you don't want to be towing.
Once you've gotten to a certain point and one or both parties are feeling something stronger than friendship, it just probably made the most sense to step away from communication.
Yeah, and you don't want to put yourself into a certain temptation or anything like that. Yeah, that must have been a really tough conversation to have. A good friend of yours, probably your best friend at that point, in some ways. Yeah. Wow, that must be really tough.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful person too. And so you lose the loss of that.
Yeah.
It's like, wow.
Do you still see her around? Your friends on Facebook or something like that?
Sometimes on Facebook. Sometimes on Facebook, yeah. But we don't really stay in touch.
Back then, in those days, did they have that pastoral year that they send seminarians on?
Well, interesting you should ask. Our class was the first class to have a pastoral year. Okay. And I asked the bishop, actually asked the seminary first, could I go to the Focolare for the year? The Focolare offered that program and their spirituality for 8 to 10 months. And seminary was reticent to do that, but Bishop Fiorenza, later Archbishop Fiorenza, was supportive. So they worked it out to where I spent one summer at St. Teresa's Memorial Park while I was doing the hospital chaplaincy ministry. Then I went to Tuscany to the Focolare from August through April. And then I came back for the remainder of that time again at St. Teresa and Memorial Park. So my pastoral year was really done mostly in Italy.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
What was that like?
There's a lot to unpack there.
What's the thing you remember the most that you take with you about that experience?
Okay. So let's imagine, I think there might have been about 30 seminarians. And they broke it. And then were other priests that had been released for a sabbatical type thing. We're all living in the same house. Okay. And the daily and weekly structure was pretty much set. But each group of seminarians were broken down into maybe a household, of 5 or 6. And you do a lot of things together when you've got the afternoon off. Maybe you go for a walk together. Maybe you play soccer together. You have a lot of sharing together of how we lived the word of life, how we were trying to put into practice the gospel. And so there's an intensity of relationship that you don't get in a seminary environment, at least not at that level, because it's a daily thing with those people for 8 months. Now, sometimes we would change members of a group, but I think the intensity of those relationships and it's kind of like family life, interposed onto guys who are in formation to the priesthood.
Wow. Yeah. So you had how much more time after your pastoral year? Just one more year?
2 more years.
2 years. So 1 year of study and then your diaconate year. Is that how that worked?
Yes.
Okay. So where did you spend your diaconate year?
St. Francis Cabrini parish. That's near Hobby Airport.
So who was the pastor at that time?
It was Father Dennis Peterson, now deceased. Yeah.
Okay. What was that like?
It was great. I was there at that time. I think we went pretty much every weekend. I remember my first time to preach, in which my first time to preach in Spanish, I should say. And I had developed my homily geared towards the children, with the idea that their parents and the adults would be kind of listening in as I talked to the kids. And unbeknownst to me, there was going to be a liturgy of the word for children. So Mass begins, and they call all the children forward, and they go marching out, And I'm like going, oh my gosh.
There goes my audience.
Oh my God. I was like, and I had written it out word for word, and I was like, oh, it was like.
Yeah. So you're editing it on the fly.
Yeah.
And it's not your first language.
Right. Yeah.
When did you start learning to speak Spanish? Was it in seminary?
No, actually in the 8th grade. Our Catholic school had a religious sister, Sister Rosario. And so we had Spanish class. And so I think I began pronouncing words, learning how to pronounce words in Spanish.
Okay.
So vocabulary was probably the key to that part. And then in high school, I took a couple of years of Spanish, just enough to maybe get a little bit further down the road. But then it really kicked off in seminary, where it was really a major part of the curriculum to learn Spanish.
Okay, so it wasn't like you had just learned Spanish and you had to rewrite something in your head.
Right. Yeah.
Did you ever, think of learning any other languages?
Well, I learned Italian.
Italian?
Yeah. So when I was in Italy, every time I was there, the language of the house was Italian.
Okay.
Furthermore, after 2.5 years of priesthood, Bishop Fiorenza asked me to do further studies. And so I went to Rome to the Gregorian University, where most of the classes were in Italian.
Okay.
So I had to learn, the Italian got better in those 2.5 years.
I was about to ask you that, if they were going to send you anywhere, because we had Father Joseph White, who was sent to Vatican for his studies.
Yeah. Now, some of those guys went as seminarians.
Okay.
And then I went as a priest.
Okay.
And so there's a different house for priests close to the Trevi Fountain. And our house was really right next to the university. So it was very convenient, but yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And then I had to study Greek, I had to study Latin, and I got to study a little bit of Hebrew, but it's...
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It must be very handy knowing, several languages.
It helps a lot, yeah. But
do you have a large Spanish-speaking population?
Yes.
Here at this parish?
We do, and it's growing, and happily so. Tonight, in fact, is going to be our first Spanish Mass on Saturday nights. We have one on Sunday, so now we're going to have 2.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they take that into consideration, the languages that when, assigning you parishes and all that.
Yeah, it's obligatory. You have to, with the needs of the archdiocese, if you speak a foreign language, especially Spanish, that's going to be factored into your assignments. Yeah.
At any point, did you ever think of joining a religious order?
I never did. In fact, when I came to the diocese, I didn't even realize there was a different path for those things. I had not even factored in that there were different religious orders. But what I found in the diocese was something that suited me very much. So I would say that in 2 ways. One is local clergy, like home, like Crosby, I'm rooted here. And although it took a while to get to know the other parts of the archdiocese, I feel very much like I'm ministering as the shepherd of a flock that I am familiar with and that I know. Right. And then the other part of that is it calls for a jack of all trades, and if I inherited anything from my dad, it's that ability to do a lot of different things, not necessarily do any of them well, but yeah, the diocesan priest, parish priest, we were talking about this, that, we do all these years of study, right? Theology and philosophy and canon law and scripture and all those things. And sometimes what you find yourself doing is figuring out how the soap dispenser works in the women's bathroom. Like, how does that get fixed,
The air conditioning's on the fritz or something like that.
How do we set this thermostat? Yeah.
Who do you need to call to get something taken care of? Yeah, because you're an administrator at the same time. Before we talk about your ordination, was there an exact point where your mom actually came around and said, I think I'm good with becoming the mother of a priest?
Yeah, interesting you should ask that question. I don't know that she would have used those words. I think what happened was we had a conversation on that topic. I don't know how she introduced it or how it even came up, but something that I said she would tell you today helped her take that step. And I think it was something to the effect of, Mom, this isn't about you. I know it wasn't those words, but what it conveyed was releasing her by saying, it's not about you. Yeah. And really, it's not about me either. It's not either one about our qualifications, and and by that time, several years had passed of me being in the seminary.
She warmed up to the idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
would it have been harder for her if you were, say, an only child?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think for any parent.
And if your sister didn't already have kids, right?
Yeah.
So that would have been really tough. Do you think she would have been a lot more resistant?
I don't know. My mom is a very understanding person.
Mm.
You know, I find that I tell people she's the least judgmental person I've ever known. You know, just got openness. So she would have never really put up a fight. Yeah.
Because I mean, I only have one son, and I would think, wow, if he were called to the priesthood, how would I take that?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
Ideally, you'd want to say you'd be excited, but then, you know, when it becomes real,
Yeah.
that's something else.
Mm-hmm.
I may be surprised at whatever my reaction might be if he does say that.
Right.
He's at the University of St. Thomas right now.
Oh,
So,
awesome. Okay. Good.
So do you remember anything about your ordination day itself?
You know, if I had to pick one memory from that day, it was the lying prostrate in St. Michael's Catholic Church in the Galleria area, because at that point the cathedral had not been built. And the co-cathedral of Sacred Heart, the old one, was too small. We had a class of 6 and one other that was ordained a month later. And so that was the largest church. But just laying there and, you know, the calling on the saints and the litany of the saints, and thinking about some of my relatives who had died and that were praying for me, you know?
Wow.
It's like, boy, if you need something to set you out on a journey, it's the idea that the saints are with you.
That's right.
You know?
Now,
So,
I heard that,
yeah.
I'm not sure if it still worked. It worked back then,
Mm-hmm.
but I heard that you could choose which saints are mentioned during the litany.
That could be the case. I don't remember them asking us.
Okay. But if you had a choice, which ones would you have said, for sure, these saints have to be there?
St. Gregory the Great, St. Francis of Assisi, St. Francis de Sales, St. Therese of Lisieux would be the ones that roll off my mind.
Just off the top of your head.
St. Catherine of Siena, you know, yeah. I like the radical, feel like,
oh yeah, definitely.
let's do this.
St. Francis of Assisi, definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Is he crazy? Probably.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then what was your first parish? Did you get assigned the night before like they do now?
So we were at lunch with Bishop Fiorenza, and traditionally he never told anybody until the day of the ordination.
Okay.
So we're sitting around this dinner table, and Sister Rosalie Karstedt was the vocation director, or the co-assistant vocation director. She was there. I'm not sure if Father Mario was there, but I kind of popped off to the bishop. I said, Sister Rosalie told us you're going to give us our assignments today, which was totally made up. Well, he had actually decided to give us our assignments that day, but now he thinks that Rosalie let the cat out of the bag. So she looked bad. And so he told us the day before we were ordained, and I was assigned to Prince of Peace in Northwest Houston.
Yes. Been there. Yeah. Nice parish. So how long were you there?
2.5 years.
What was it like up there? Like your first time now, right?
Yeah.
Very green, walking into a big parish.
Yep. Well, I think the big takeaway for me was I had anticipated the idea that I'm called to serve. You know, Monsignor Borski and the faculty, really, the drumbeat was as one who serves. You know, you're a servant, washing feet, all this stuff. And the idea that you're going to pour yourself out in service to the others, right? So I was geared up for that, you know, and whatever that was going to mean. And but what I was just floored by was the amount of love that came back. You know, this unmerited, undeserved, you know, just love of the people of God. So, yeah, I was like, wow, this is awesome.
So you didn't even think that was about that?
I wasn't thinking about that at all.
You're just like, I'm here to serve.
Yeah. And I think by God's grace, I got to work with the youth. Lots of confirmation retreats during that time and other kinds of retreats with a great youth ministry program. That's the best thing for young priests, you know, get involved with a great youth ministry program. And so investing, it felt like those were like my sheep. I don't know that I would have said that at the time, but the investment level was, I'm investing in them. And then the other was the Spanish, because the pastor didn't speak Spanish. So I had all the Spanish masses, all the Spanish homilies, all the Spanish funerals, quinceañeras, confessions, all of that stuff. So I also felt that what is it like to really be the shepherd of somebody, to have the responsibility for their well-being? because there's a shift. You probably know this. Like, you're married, you're happy and everything. That you become a dad, something changes.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's the same shift happens as you move into this feeling of really being responsible for the spiritual and pastoral well-being of people.
And the other thing is, like you said, your pastor didn't speak Spanish, so it was pretty much all on you.
Right. Yep.
Wow. So that really gave you an attachment to that community.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Did any of the young people that you worked with eventually, pursue religious life?
Wow. I don't know anybody from Prince of Peace that ended up ordained. And it's been so long ago now, I might have forgotten.
Yeah, there might have been some seeds that you planted that you didn't see come to fruition.
Yeah.
Wow.
One of the interesting things, though, is that on the day we were ordained, the youth from Prince of Peace were in our ordination. So they were part of the entrance procession. Okay. And I remember watching the video a couple of months later, not even realizing that until I watched these kids coming in. I was like, that's Ryan. That's Matt. Like, oh my gosh. And I realized, and I went to those kids. I said, I didn't realize y'all were in my ordination. And you guys, do you know Matt Regetz, Dave Regetz?
The name is familiar.
Okay. Big at Prince of Peace ministry there.
Okay.
And Matt was youth minister there for years, his brother Dave. So they actually went off to A&M and came back and got into youth ministry and still friends with them today. But so I think of them in terms of the fruits of that ministry, because so many people did end up in ministry in various ways. So, yeah.
So how long did you say you were there again?
2.5 years.
2.5 years. Then is that when you became Vocation Director?
That was when they asked me to go for further studies.
Okay. So that's when you went to Italy.
Yep, to Rome, to the Casa Santa Maria, attending classes at the Greg in spiritual theology.
So that was for a year?
2.5.
2.5?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a while.
Yeah.
Was that rough on your family, not you not being in the area?
At that point, I think everybody was young enough to where we weren't really too worried about things. But I know every time I got on the plane to go back over there, I was like crying in my heart and like trying to fight back tears, because it's like, it's 6 months. It might even be, I arrived in January. I didn't get to go home till December. So it was a full 12 months of being away from home. And it was the dawn of the internet age where you still had AOL, stuff like that. So email was a great way to stay in touch.
Yeah.
We were talking yesterday about how in certain circumstances, the priests are going by the mail room trying to see if they got any mail. Like you can imagine, like soldiers deployed is like, they can't wait for the mail to be delivered to see if they got mail.
Wow. And then coming back, is that when you became Vocation Director?
Actually, I went to St. Rose of Lima as the parochial vicar.
Okay.
So I came back, who knows what purpose that was. I don't know that there was a real plan other than that was what the need was.
Okay, yes.
And so I came there to St. Rose, served for 6 months with Monsignor Tom Wendland, who then passed away the night after Christmas.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So again, Bishop Fiorenza comes to me, would you be willing to run the parish until we can bring in a pastor this summer?
Okay.
So they sent me some help to fill in, but I was essentially left as interim pastor.
Or administrator or something like that. Yeah.
Which is a fascinating experience. That's when I first learned that people don't tell you the truth.
Why is that?
When you're in charge, they tell you what they want you to hear, right? And I started realizing it's like, I'm not getting the whole story here. I need to start asking a lot more questions. But I failed my way through 6 months of being in charge, surrounded by people who were really trying to help me. And that support, for me, team is really a big thing. And I really felt the people coming around me, understanding just what kind of position I was placed in, and being very compassionate, merciful.
So do you say, when you say they didn't tell the truth, they're sugarcoating things for you all the time? Is that what it is?
Like, hey, Father, there's this situation I think you need to be aware of. And, and if I made the decision based on what I heard the first person say, I was really only getting part of it. And then after having made a few erroneous decisions because I didn't listen widely. So this notion of synodality, I learned that 25 years ago. So it's like we have to listen widely if we want to make good decisions.
6 months. Then how long were you the administrator?
Yeah, so that 6 months until the summer was when they brought in Monsignor James Anderson as the pastor.
Okay.
And we served together for a year prior to my appointment as the Vocation Director in the summer of 2000.
Why do you think they chose you?
You know, I've never really thought about that. I know that I have a lot of passion for the priesthood. I have had done the studies in Rome with a focus on discernment, though I wasn't thinking of vocational discernment. It was just a topic I was interested in.
Okay.
But it became a tool very useful in the work of vocations. What does discernment really look like? You know, so that was helpful.
And maybe your work with the youth might have been a factor as well.
Yeah, and I was pretty young looking back in the day. So,
you still look pretty good. I cannot guess your age. I'll tell you that. Right. Now, how long were you the vocation director there?
7 years.
7 years.
But I worked in the chancery for 49 years.
Oh.
Because every year working in the chancery is like 7 other years. You can cut that part out.
That's hilarious.
It's tough work.
I mean, we have interviewed Father Dad and Father Richard and Father TJ, and especially Father TJ is saying it's probably the toughest job you can have as a priest. Would you agree with him?
I would. And now I'm not sure what his reasons were. My experience was that we're made for communion. And when you're in a parish, you're in a communion. You're daily in a communion with that Eucharistic community, and you're for the highs and the lows of all those interactions. And then you're pulled out of that and you're placed in an office setting. Right? 9 to 5 kind of job. You have no specific training for that job. Right? Everybody else working in the chancery were accountants before they got into the accounting department.
Okay.
Or were lawyers before they got into the general counsel office or whatever it was. So the challenge is real of learning very quickly how to be the boss of employees, how to really enter into heavy administration, and also then the portion of that which is going out and giving vocation talks, working and accompanying young men and young women towards a vocation in the church. So it's a big learning curve.
Wow. How long did it take you to kind of, get the hang of it?
Ooh, about the time I was running out of steam, really? I liked it. I liked the work I was doing, but it was costing me. And I knew after about the 6th year that some of my energy had disappeared and I still could do the work and I still believed in it. But there was something that I was like, so I went to that point, Archbishop Fiorenza, and then a year later to Cardinal DiNardo and said, maybe, I don't know, if I just want you to know what I'm at. I'll keep doing what you want me to do.
But you're running out of steam.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you remember any of the guys that, you brought into seminary? Did any of them eventually become priests?
Father Dat, Father TJ, not Father Richard. I think I knew Father Richard McNeely as a candidate maybe, or who was in discernment, but I don't think I was vocation director when he entered. Okay. But I mean, you can just look at a lot of the guys who are, I think Father Preston was still just a young adult, in the area. I might have already left whenever he really started talking about entering the seminary. But there was a generation there from 2000 to 2007 of guys who were then ordained probably like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Yeah.
Now, were there seeds, like you said, like guys that you were starting to bring in and somebody else closes the deal and brings them in?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What's that like?
I don't know that there's a strong memory on my part or experience of that. Because I shifted my attention to becoming the pastor of St. Rose of Lima.
Okay, so, you're just so busy already that you had to...
Yeah, I mean, I certainly supported Father Dat, and I did as much as I could to help him get off on a good start, and I was always there for him to... And same with the others, Father TJ and Father Richard. I continue, if they ask me, to try to bring whatever perspective I might have. But once I shifted into being a pastor of a parish that I had been at as the parochial vicar... Okay, I was full bore, falling in love again, renewing my relationship with all of the people of St. Rose. Yeah.
What advice, as your time as a vocation director, would you give somebody who's, considering entering the seminary, very, very hesitant?
Yeah. Well, it's something that I believe firmly, and it's from my own story, is it has to be about God. It has to be about God. It can't be about what you want to do, or that you just think that priesthood is so incredible, right? And which hopefully we all do. But when someone is more interested in the priesthood than they are in giving their life to God and the hard work of conforming our lives to be a disciple of Jesus, right? Not just doing things, because all of us like to do the stuff. At a certain point, it's just so rewarding, right, to do those things.
Yeah, doing baptisms and weddings and all that.
If you don't have a foundation, even Jesus talks about the house built on rock versus the sand.
Yes.
Whoever does the will of my heavenly Father. That means putting into practice the gospel, back to the word of life idea. If we're not, doing that out of love, trying to return to the Lord for all his goodness to us, I think without that, it's going to be a really bumpy journey. And hopefully, even if it does start out with maybe a less than mature approach to it, but God is still calling you to the priesthood, that you will, stay true and do the hard work of developing that. Yeah.
Now, if there's somebody that comes up to you nowadays and says, "I'm thinking about entering seminary," or "I'm getting this call," what's the first thing you tell them?
Well, I don't. I listen. I want to listen. I might ask some questions like, "Okay, well, when did this start?" Some of the questions you've asked me. It's like I want to hear the story. And I'm listening for certain things. Again, is it like, man, I'd love to be the chaplain for the Texans. How do I become that? Or is it, there's something within me that is just longing for something that I know God has for me. Whatever it is, you're listening for certain things and trying to get an idea of where they might be on the path, right? It's not really about yet, are they called to the priesthood or not? When we're discerning, I think the first thing that we're really discerning is this call to Jesus, and you start looking for some signs, I guess, if you want to put it that way, of something that's already flowing through them. So if someone comes to me and they say, Father, I've been involved in my parish. I've been on the pastoral council. I've been a lector. I work with St. Vincent de Paul. At one point I was doing the RCIA classes and helping with that. And you see this sort of way in which the grace of God has already been manifesting in them. And it doesn't have to be in the church, but it's this sense of, because I want to live the gospel, this stuff has already been happening. Well, then you go, okay, let's talk, But if they're still at just sort of a beginning point where they're just dreaming about a career or something like that, but that hasn't manifested in some kind of fruitfulness, some kind of service or ministry, then maybe that's the work that needs to be done first.
Yeah. Got to slow it down first. Yeah. Before entering seminary, doing a little more formation.
Right. Yeah. I listened to some podcast and all of a sudden I want to be a priest.
I heard you need priests.
Yeah, I can do that.
So after your stint as the Vocation Director, is that when you ended up here at St. Mary?
Actually, that was when I went to St. Rose of Lima.
Okay.
So I had been there as the parochial vicar. I got a call to come up to Cardinal DiNardo's office. You're always a little bit worried about that, right?
The boss.
And he starts talking to me about St. Rose of Lima. And okay, tell me about what's going on with the parish. Spent about 5 minutes, 10 minutes kind of giving me a little bit of the lowdown on what's going on in the parish. Some of that I maybe knew because of, my friends that were still there that I still played golf with and went to birthday parties. And so I thought he was going to ask me maybe my input on something. And then he says, would you consider going there as the next pastor? And I was like, really not prepared for that. And interiorly, I was like, yeah,
in a heartbeat.
I'd love to go back there. But discernment is more than just saying what this kind of, that's only one note in a song. So, I said to him, listen, I'm ready to do whatever you think is best for the diocese.
Mm-hmm.
I would find no, right now, obstacle within myself to going there as pastor. So yeah, that happened, and I was ready to go back and, get to work.
How long were you there?
Oh gosh, I think it was 8 years.
8 years.
8 years, yeah.
8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any parochial vicars that are still around?
Father Fong Nguyen was my parochial vicar. Father David Harris was my parochial vicar. I think those are the only two that I remember having. And then it switched to, they couldn't give me a parochial vicar anymore, but I invited a retired priest to come in, Father KK. So he was helping out by the time I was transferred here.
How was that whole experience different that second time around?
Good question. Well, fundamentally, it goes from being the guy who's following the vision of someone else and just doing the ministry, and having fun, just the enjoyment of. And that's the thing about being a parochial vicar. You get to do all of the fun stuff, and you don't have as much of the responsibility of the decision-making, right? So
the buck doesn't stop with you.
No disparagement towards parochial vicars, but every pastor will tell you it's a big difference whenever you are the one signing the checks and answerable to the bishop.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back...
And people complain to you.
And they do. And they're just the dynamics of that too. It's like sometimes they will complain and sometimes they won't. Mm. Sometimes you're the last to know. Like the time the cushions were not placed back into the church after the Easter Vigil because they didn't want the wax dripping on the cushions. Fine. I didn't know. I don't sit out in the pews. Like 6 or 8 weeks had gone by until finally some parishioner said, "Why don't you want the cushions in the church?" I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, well, so-and-so told us that you don't like the cushions in there because of the acoustics." Like, the most frequent lie told on the campus of a parish is, "Father said," fill in the blank, right? Somebody's going to use your name just like we do sometimes. Well, the cardinal wants us to do whatever when it's not necessarily completely accurate. So yeah, it took 6 or 8 weeks for somebody to get the courage to tell me that they wanted the cushions back,
Oh, it's like a telephone game, and the message just kind of got to...
Everybody thinks somebody else is telling you.
Yeah.
And nobody has told you. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
But it's great. It's like I knew those people. I already had relationships with them. It was very easy to step into the role of pastor in that regard. I didn't have the same learning curve that some would have going to a parish they're not familiar with, the people they're not familiar with. So all of that made it much easier.
Did you have any experience like kids that you baptized that, now you're doing their confirmation or their wedding or something like that? Yeah,
it's hard to name some of them because of that sweep of time from 1998 all the way to 2008. Some people, it does feel like not only did I do their wedding, but I baptized their kids, first communion, got called back for a wedding at some point. Of course, you have the funerals that go along with that too. People that are very dear to you. And
What's it like for a priest with all the highs and lows of things like that? Now that you mentioned that, great things like baptismals, confirmations, weddings, and then you're ministering to people who have sick relatives, people who pass away.
Yeah. I think that for a person listening to this, it's hard to imagine how you could get used to it. That it's a daily phenomenon of moving from one emotional environment to another, even into non-emotional environments. So I'm at my desk, I'm reading email. It's like there's a lot of normality in the day as well. But I think almost from even probably during the seminary, you're getting used to being involved in people's lives at very acute moments. Both, as you said, the highs and the lows. So you're getting exposed to that over time, always a little bit more deeply, always a little bit more frequently, until you've just hopefully developed that ability to shift that level. I will tell this to people. Priests before Mass are trying to get prepared themselves to enter into the sacred liturgy. And while they might be shaking hands and doing stuff, it's not a good time to bring up a problem. That they're upset with the business manager about something, or there's the holy water is empty, or whatever it might be. So sometimes give us some mercy if you come up to us when we're about to celebrate a sacrament or something that we may not be ready to shift focus onto a maintenance issue, a difficulty you had with a staff member or whatever, or a rule that the parish has.
Yeah, well, you're about to do one of the most important things that a priest does is the Holy Mass.
And we're not always at our best. So we do learn to shift gears from the highs and the lows. And I think hopefully God gives us a grace to do that, to be present to people. Yeah.
Are there any really tough days?
Sure.
Days that, is there a support group for priests, the other priests that you talk to?
Yeah. I think that we try to work out for ourselves what works for each of us. Okay. Some people will have a very robust network of relationships, family that still lives in the diocese that they see on a regular basis or communicate with, friends from before they were priests, former parishioners that really became close to them, but no, they're no longer part of your immediate world. So they're kind of safe to talk to, or maybe to vent a little bit too, because they're neutral parties at that point.
Yes.
And then the brother priests. I think it's very important for us to make the effort, take the initiative to connect to other priests. It's a fundamental belief of mine that we have to be there for each other. And that idea of priestly fraternity becomes a real thing. So for me, it's a big part of my own priesthood. I'm on a Zoom call every Friday. Once a month, I have a Word of Life meeting with priests. We get together for dinner here with priests locally, usually about once every month or two. So do things like that. Yeah.
What's it like, the dynamic? Because you are the vocation director and you bring guys in and they become priests and now they're your brother priests. That must be a very interesting, dynamic.
There's a shift that happens, and it can be marked by when they stop calling you Father Clint and become comfortable just calling you Clint. Because at least in my generation, there was an informality that happened among priests, that you would, be comfortable calling each other by the first name, especially in non-public settings.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But
you're watching the game or something like that. Yeah.
But there'll still be the case where a guy who knew me as father will still say, Father Clint.
Just out of instinct, out of habit. Yeah.
But it's cool. It's cool. If you feel a little bit of that fatherhood, energy of guys you have a real investment in, and it feels good whenever they come and ask for advice or reach out to you with something maybe they're going through. So
after that, you come in here now. That was 10 years ago, you said?
10 years ago.
10 years ago. What was it like now that you've got a couple of parishes under your belt? You're coming in as a new pastor, and is this, somewhat smaller? Is it smaller than
It's about the same size.
About the same size? Okay.
About the same size. Now, St. Rose might have grown since then. I know the school has grown tremendously since I left, maybe because I left. But about the same size. The difference for me that I felt immediately was what I call the Houston culture to Texas City culture, or even just not Houston. So I grew up in Crosby. I know what it feels like to be a part of a organic kind of town. Where people know each other, have grown up together, are often related to one another.
Yeah.
And Texas City in this parish is a lot like what I grew up with in Crosby. But all of my priestly experience to that point had been at Prince of Peace in the suburbs, at St. Rose of Lima, which is, just outside of the loop, which also had a sense of community to it, but it was still Houston.
Yeah.
With freeways.
Yeah.
Whatnot.
A different kind of relationships between the parishioners. Yeah.
Yes. So one of the things I had to realize was in Texas City, you wave to people. You say hi in the grocery store. You chat with somebody, that you just meet on the street. There's a sense of friendliness that in Houston would be like, looked at askance, right?
Sort of, the big city thing where everybody's a stranger.
Yeah, keep to yourself.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah. This parish also, because of that history, has a pride and an investment level that this is our parish. I say there's a difference between someone who says, I go to St. Rose of Lima. I go to St. Mary of the Miraculous Medal versus the person who says, I belong to. Now, we think those are sometimes interchangeable, but in reality, there is a real difference. And, people who feel like they've really invested and their families have invested, and there's an ownership level that makes ministry easier because of that sense of investment that they have. Yeah.
If the cardinal were to call you and say, okay, we're going to move you to another parish, what would you take the most out of this parish?
Well, the first thing is I would say, Cardinal, you're not my bishop anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that's right. Oh my gosh,
So
I totally,
if
yes.
Archbishop,
Yes, I totally, yeah. I'm still in that mind frame, yes.
Yeah.
So what if the bishop were to call you and say, the Archbishop were to call you and say, hey, let's move to another, what would you take away from this parish?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is when I came here, I probably had more confidence than was warranted. More of a sense of thinking that I knew what I was doing, or that I got the keys to success. I kind of know that was a mistake. That was pride. I had a lot to learn. And I think that I have learned, putting into practice what you learn is different than learning it. Like, I've learned some lessons, but I'm still struggling to put them into practice. But I would take away from here is, first and foremost, the importance of the Acts retreats. Now, there may be other things that fill that same kind of role, but in this community, Acts has been a instrument of renewal, of parish renewal and evangelization.
Yes.
I saw that you have a bracelet on. I'm not sure if that indicates.
This is my Acts bracelet. Yeah.
So the dynamic of someone, setting aside some time for God, doing it into the context of others. So the idea of accompaniment, there's that community idea and the honesty that can happen among people without, saying anything more. That takes the community or the members who have done that from a level of just going to the church to belonging to the church.
Yes.
And it takes them from a way of being in fellowship that's really just about social, interactions to a spiritual body of Christ experience. I've had a body of Christ experience, what that looks like when the body of Christ becomes fully alive, when the gifts of the laity are being employed by the Holy Spirit together. That changes somebody, and it changes the community person by person when they can experience that deeper level of connectedness. It could be accomplished in other ways, but that's, I think, the way it has happened here.
Is that something you'd recommend to priests, to other, pastors?
Yeah.
Hey, if you don't have Acts in your parish, get in there as soon as you can.
Right. Or something that fits the same kind of dynamic. Synodality, to go off on that kind of topic, is an idea of really listening to one another in the context of prayer. And that means openness to hearing what the other person has to say, right? Somebody has to be heard before they can hear. And I think synodality and some of the dynamics that's being proposed in that can have our journeys together. That's kind of the pilgrim journey together. It can deepen those. That accomplishes something similar to what happens on a retreat, or specifically an Acts retreat. So I would tell my brother priests is, don't discard this. There's an opportunity here. It's going to take courage and humility, because for a priest to enter into those conversations where you're really open to hearing and invite disagreement and invite the honesty of other people. So, that could provide a similar path, I think.
So you were on the basketball team for the priests in the seminary. How many years were you on the team?
Well, let's see. We've had how many games now? 8? I think we've had 8 or 9.
I think it was 8. I think it's 5-3 at this point.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right. I think last night's defeat took it to 5-3. So I was from the first get-go. First team. This was the first year I didn't play. I did work with the team in practices, trying to assist in whatever limited capacity I have. So my commitment was there to the team. I just didn't suit up.
Why not?
It's a hard thing. It's like if you talk, and if this was our sports interview, you'd be hearing this like, it's really hard to retire. The competitive fire does not go away just because you broke 2 bones in your finger 4 years ago. You broke the bone in this finger 2 years ago. You had to have surgery on your wrist 2 years ago. So over those 8 years, I've broken 3 bones and had a torn ligament that had to be repaired because my body isn't as young as it used to be.
And then you've got like 18, 19-year-olds playing for the Seminarian team.
Oh, yeah. But last night, I swore my body was saying, you could go out there and you could, they need me. I need to be out there defending this guy because I think I could still do it.
Especially after Father Preston went down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we pray for him. Hopefully he'll be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were showing the X-ray of his his elbow. How long is he going to be out?
Well, I don't know that. And I'm no doctor, though at one point I wanted to be. I would say that with the recovery time for playing basketball again, I'd give it 3 to 4 months. And even then, it's going to be needing a lot of warm-up to get the ligaments and everything kind of going again, because that was his shooting arm.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And then I also heard last year, was it Father Nicholas Ramirez? Was he the one who tore his ACL?
No, I think it was an Achilles.
Oh, was it Achilles?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's what happens when you get older, right? It's like, as much as we try to stay in shape, it's hard to do with the life we live. That those injuries are going to be a part of it.
Wow, Achilles, that's at least a year, huh?
Yeah. He was wanting to see if he could get back for the game, but I think prudence was.
Oh yeah. I mean, even professional athletes. I mean, a whole year is pretty much. Yeah. Wow, that's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, are you thinking next year, since Father Preston's and Father Nicholas, maybe?
I think there's a part of me that says I want to try to stay in shape, or at least get back into shape and stay in shape and just take it almost year by year because, there's, who knows? Maybe I'll still be playing when I'm 60, but.
Maybe they'll have a seniors game.
Yeah. Right.
Right? They do it in tennis.
Yeah, that's right.
I love watching those games. I mean, they have a lot of fun, especially when they mic up the tennis players and they're talking to each other. Maybe they can do something like that. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
So one last thing. Of all the experiences that you've had, how many years have you been a priest now?
Going on 32.
Going on 32 years. 32 years of being a priest. A whole lifetime. What would you want your parishioners to remember the most about you?
I come back to the idea that I want the glory to go to God. And I find oftentimes the mistaken identity where people attribute to us what is really the action of God through an instrument, right? Mary, I mean, incredible, Saint Mary, right? Saint Mary, okay? No greater creature ever. And she was ordinary. She was an ordinary girl from Nazareth, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it was God who did that, and grateful to her and all of us for her yes. I would want people to say the focus, that Father Clint never lost focus, that, and I know I have, that it's God working through human beings. And let's look at what God is doing. Look at what God does with people like us, okay? With people like us, that's that's the story, I think, is look at what God can do when someone says yes,
Thank you so much, Father Clint.
Yeah.
God bless you.
I wish we could keep going.
Well, you're a busy guy. You've got a lot of things going on. And thank you for having us here at your beautiful parish.
Yeah. Great to have you and your family.